Hi there, Randy Green here. Thought processes. Terminator movie Dark Fate. I think it's from 2019. It's Paramount, Skyline. Sorry about that. Movie makers, just to give it credit. I'll put link below so it's giving credit the right manner. But the whole process of the old Terminator movies and what the plot was there, and then this one comes up, and again, how timelines can be altered by single people and their actions. What we kind of have in both the earlier time or all the earlier Terminator movies, or this whole kind, there's one person that is significant for the salvation of the world. A modern day kind of savior that is, of course, highly trained, that goes from not knowing what's going on, being elected, being hunted down, being targeted, being undergoing several attacks, and then just to end up become this grand hero, because apparently this person gets or becomes the grand hero in the future. The question is, does this person become the hero in the future because the future goes back and says, well, this person will play a significant role, and by that also the past, by interfering with the current type of human, whereas if it had left to its own trajectory, would it then have become the hero? So that's a good question, the conundrum that we are. So when we think about time travel coming from the future and traveling back and interfering, and does that affect who we are now? And does it alter the timelines? What is a timeline, by the way? Does timelines even exist? That's a good question. Does realities even exist as we know of them? Is there even such a thing as time? Is there a separation between the future and the present? Is there even a separation between the present and the past? Does this even be as a kind of, is there anything that we could say there actually is a future, there is a past, there is a present? The question is there? Good question. If we go with the understanding of the actual interactive simulation programs that they kind of have, they have what is tangible or real is in concordance with our energy system, meaning that if our energy system has a high viability rate, well, then a lot of things that we come in touch with, like you have a laser beam that puts its light on something, or a beam of light in darkness, what you look at becomes visible, everything else is kind of in darkness, is not really actively activated as a kind of preservance of the reality field program itself. Now, we're a lot of people that are looking at reality all the time, and by that, reality is now constantly being in action, similarly as we're having light is on all the time on the planet 24/7. There's always someone who has put on light. That could be a good symbolic representation of the minds of people that's always on. Day and night, people are actively contemplating, thinking, feeling, dreaming in awakened state, dreaming in sleep state, all of these processes that constantly are working with what used to be the astral barrier fields or the astral plane, the subconscious material, the emotional material that goes in and creates different processes in the physical form, the peripheral nervous system, and then the mind field that's connected to the ionosphere and the higher levels of the Schumann resonance. The Schumann resonance is, of course, connected to the peripheral nervous system, that kind of I think it's the gap or between 4 to 10 hertz. I can't remember what it is. It's so long since, it's been a while since I looked into that, around 2009 or something. It's years ago. I should probably look that up, but that's just come up with some kind of information. So what is it that I want to share here in this understanding of reality and the time and past, present, and future? How does that connect to our three lower fields and our inner processes and our holographic energy system? Because our holographic energy system is positioned within realities where there is no time. So that is timeless. There is no time. And by that, there are no timelines either. There are code streams. But inside this reality, we have created a kind of science that tells us that there is time, and there are, by that, timelines, with the idea that reality is irreversible. It begins from the singularity event that is called Big Bang, and then it moves through space, through time and space, with that different types of momentum, whether it's the speed of light or it's a slower or higher electromagnetic frequency, all depending on which type of life form that we're talking about, which type of energetic expression that are running on these different fields and clusters of different types of configurations that we call the frequency spectrum. So with that, we begin to understand, okay, so a timeline, that's something that begins somewhere and ends somewhere. And by that, since we believe in the Einsteinian ideas of space-time, that time is kind of equivalent to, or actually is interacting with or codependent on space and the velocity of, or the momentum of the units that are moving through that space. So the higher the velocity, the quicker we reach what we call the speed of light, that is the complete constant type of high speed of light, where light has no matter and by that has no gravity. So that's the highest level of speed that we can reach, which again, when we go in and look at the equation of that one, we'll say, well, there is a constant something. There is the equation itself is built up in a manner that you say, well, if we change that constant, or if we change some of the factors that are played into that equation, well, is it then true? And they say, well, Einstein came up with it and he proved again and again and again it was true. Well, what if his parameters were wrong? What if his the constant on one is wrong? What about his understanding of space is wrong? What if the whole idea that he was looking into some kind of Newtonian old paradigm on how to triangulate the different positions in space, and what is that completely incorrect because he did not put in the different types of that goes into the fifth dimension and the whole understanding of space as a matrix that are built up in a grid pattern that works differently and not works within what we could call a three-dimensional space where time is the fourth dimension that moves in space. So if we go with that concept and say, well, it's a three-dimensional space, well, then of course that equation might look like that. And again, with this whole idea that, well, then energy must have a maximum as well as it must have a minimum. But what about if we kind of say, well, as we can see with the electromagnetic spectrum, that what begins in the one end and what ends up in the other end are kind of what we could call out of our range of visible light, and by that we don't know what it is, so it fizzles out into nothingness. Similarly, when we go to the quantum fields, it fizzles out into something we can't really understand, or we go high above and into space, we also go into something that we can't see or perceive because it's beyond our level of perception. So in that manner, we can say that we are, when we follow the interactive simulation programs, the more narrow-minded we are, the smaller the world we have, the more expanded we are, the bigger the world we have to perceive and to interact with. That's kind of going with the idea of the different spectra of energy that follows within electromagnetic spectrum. So we have that within the atom-based realities that are what we call triangulated in a trinity structure, the proton, neutron, and electrons that are driven by 4 different types of forces that are kept within a paradigm of specific limitations. So that is what we could call the three-dimensional space, where we exist, quote unquote, that's the base program. And then we go beyond that, and then we go into the holographic realities, where that's based upon probabilities and possibilities, similar to the quantum dynamics, where reality begins to change and operate in a completely different manner. That's where a lot of the things that we don't understand becomes possible. So if we say there is a place where there's no time, because time is depending on Einsteinian sciences of the three-dimensional space that operates in a specific way that is under specific type of limitations. But if we break down the Einsteinian sciences, says, well, Einstein was wrong. Dead wrong. That's not how reality is. Let's come up with something new. Let's, instead of working with these trinity structures that are built upon the old concepts of religion as well, because my best guess is that even though that he wanted to come up with something new, he was still of Jewish origin, right? So there is still some kind of deep-rooted level of some kind of beginning and end. But what if we go with that and say, well, there is no beginning, there is no end, there's infinity all the way around, and time does not have a beginning, space does not even have a beginning. Big Bang was not the beginning, it was just a continuation of something else that was there. So everything moves on in different types of situation, different types of reality configurations that do come into manifestation and then do cease to exist, as the ideas that are captured within the Buddhist thought forms are also saying or telling us, as similar as we have it in the Brahmian sciences or the Brahmian ideas of reality that are based upon the Aryans and their concepts of reality wherever they came from, if we go back in history. So we're again having this, okay, where does all of these thought forms come from? Is there a beginning? Is there an end? Or is there a perpetuating cycles of existence? I will go with the latter, because that's what I remember as well. When I look in my inner space, then that's what I'm seeing. I kind of can go through the whole of Big Bang, and then I go out on the other side, and then there's another universe and go through that, and there's another one like pearls on a string, where there is this midpoint that you can go through, and this is not wormholes, this is not black holes, this is not white holes, this is part of the holographic configuration itself. So when we go into that understanding, we also understand that the word of timelines only work within the Einsteinian space-time, where we understand these are a specific mathematical program that were put in play to keep people within specific limited types of sciences. And we then go in and say, let's break down that limitation and work with a holographic, multidimensional, matrix-oriented reality, not to go into what others have said. The matrix idea came from Paul Dirac. He was a scientist that were operating in the early 1900s and working with quantum dynamics. Just to kind of get that where that word comes from, a matrix is a mathematical way of working with different forms of coordinates in space. We could also call these scalar fields with a mathematical understanding. So just so you get where does this terminology come from, look it up. It's part of mathematical ideas and some of the equations and sciences that have been built upon that. But that is also working with a set of limitations that goes back to Pythagoras. So if we go back and say, where did he get his ideas from? Where would people even get these ideas from, right? And are they the correct ideas? Are mathematics, as we know of it, the right way to work with reality, or is it only to work within the frequency spectrum? And if we then say, well, how do we then work with the holographic pieces of or levels of reality? And that goes through code systems. Are codes similar to, for instance, Greek letters or Roman letters, capital letters, English letters? What type of letters? No, not at all. Are they equivalent with some? If you go with mathematics, it's the Greek letters that they use for symbols in mathematics. Are they similar to that? Are they geometrical figures as Pythagoras thought? Or is it the spheres, the harmonic spheres, or the harmonic sounds of the spheres that are building up our universal structure? Is it the spheres within the spheres that goes with the Buddhist the Buddhist cosmology and the 31 realms that are divided into sub-realms that has its own dimension and its own sphere where different things come into being? When one is due to the laws of karma and recycling dynamics, then if one being comes into existence on a specific level of energy due to karma and cause and conditions, well, then that sphere comes to life, and that means that reality comes into existence, which I can completely agree with. I recall that long before I even began finding the answers in the different teaching systems and thought systems that are out there and available for us. So for me, it's always this kind of, I get the insights and then I look for the information. So I have a language for it to explain what I'm seeing. So with that, we begin to understand, okay, if we are to understand the true nature of reality and who and what we are to understand the true nature of our own energy system. And that's where this one begins. That's where the most important level of our knowledge begin, not because it's the download or we get it channeled or whatever. We could also say, well, some of the things that people get channeled, perhaps it's just their own weird astral entities that they are communicating with. Some of their own archetypes, some of their own subconscious memories or information systems. It doesn't even have to be an actual entity. It could just be some made-up entity that we created as children, or make-up friends, or made-up friends. Make-up friends? Yeah, as a girl, right? No, made-up friends. But we are also saying, well, what if these could also actually be the maintainer grays that are with some of the hybrid kids? They have grays around them that are interactively connected to the hybrid kit. I've seen that configuration as well in Australia. So what are we dealing with here? What's the level of reality where we know this is just our own distortion that we're dealing with and that we're communicating with to clear it out, activate it to clear it out so it ceases to exist, and by that we can move to the next layers of our holographic architecture? Or is it that we are talking about actively intercepting different types of technologies that can create holographic overlay systems within our energy field, and by that pretend to be an actual living being, but in fact it's just an inserted hologram that by that releases code systems that interferes with our perception field, and by that clogs our perception of what's really going on? Or is it what we could call frequency-based type of technologies that alters the neural network, and by that creates different thought processes and different forms of imagery or locked in information systems from where the brain begins to operate and begin to focus on certain thought forms and processes, thinking it's its own material or coming from its own, or quote unquote, that means us, that's part of the body, and it processes this information. How does the brain even process this information? Because of the different fields that are around the brain, of which there are 5. So how do we go in all of this? How do we, as those of us who are doing this work, how do we really begin to pinpoint that this is outer, this is inner, this is true, this is false, this is interception, this is actual information, this is holographic overlay, this is distortion, what spectrum of energy are we working on? And these are some of the challenges that we also have and will have in the years to come. So the whole plot of this one, beginning with, does timeline exist? Technically, no, it's part of a made-up mathematical system that are based upon a set of paradigms and sciences that are connected to one specific person that actually made that come true, and by that the whole world abide. So this is again where one person can become significant. So that does that person operate on his or her own volition, or are these people part of something else where they give up the information? And most of these people, they're convinced that what they bring forth is of course the ultimate truth of all there is, and by that have claims, and by that begin to copyright it. The matter of the fact is, what if we're all reading reality? Who can claim rights of the understanding of reality, especially if we don't know what reality is? So what are the meta perspectives of everything we're dealing with? How do we deal with this from as much angles as possible? How do we expand our knowledge base to as many layers as possible so that we scientifically and parascientifically operate within all of these different understandings of reality to find what is the most common tendencies within all of the spheres, within everything that we have observed, within everything we have experienced, with the type of energy we are dealing with the dynamics and laws of the different spheres, as we know, with the entities that are present in the different spheres. Then we begin to understand the expanded level of reality and how complex it actually is, and how that much that demands of us being humans, part of the fifth realm, where humans unfold from being what we are into being very complex, holographic, oriented beings that understand how to work with the holographic realities, and at the same time also are present in what we call a matter form or an organic form that can change all depending on which realm we are working in. So this is also important to understand the responsibility we have as living, breathing, life force producing entities that are for the time being present in this reality field. And I'm deliberately moving forward into, instead of focusing on all the things that are blocking us, which I have completed with the whole academy and the advanced clearing work courses and the transition dynamics and how you use these progression sciences to get into becoming a change maker or a forerunner or a power scientist, all depending on what is in your energy system, what capacity you have, what was your original purpose when you came here, where you came from, were you part of the cargo ships, were you brought here by your own volition, did you come here as part of the enslavement programs, whatever brought you here, that's up for you to figure out. And then it all comes down to, okay, but that might not actually be who you were in the original programs before the timeline event and before the colonization of this quadrant. What were you before there? And that's also part of our investigation processes, to chip away all of these hollow overlays and hollow inserted interception code streams that are altering our perception of whatever code stream we are dealing with and entering into. And interestingly enough, the ideas or with the cosmology and the ones that begins the path of liberation, they enter into the stream, as it's said, into the stream of the path of liberation. Again, a code stream that leads to different insights and different types of unfolding of different information layers done in meditation, inner practices, and within a specific set of laws, the Eightfold Path, for instance, but mostly built upon the insights and the observation, the practice of observation, the practice of reflection, and the practice of mindful implementation of these inner experiences and inner observations and inner reflections on what we have perceived, to build out the 5 layers of a neural network, so to speak, and at the same time also begin to break down what is no longer of use and let go what we no longer need to cling on to. And that's why I'm now to find a different approach to work with this information layer, since there is so much similarity in the words and the vocabulary, plus my past life, as well as the studies and the learning processes I had there and what that led to and how that has naturally been activated in this energy system. I think that's one of the code streams and one of the timelines that I will go into full-heartedly, engage into, thinking that type of conceptualization of reality in the 31 realms, with that idea that might actually be a White Syrian elder interpretation, earlier than the later planetary hierarchy, earlier than the later Syrian A's, earlier than the later Syrian B's and their crystalline teachings, earlier than everything. Are they some of what we could call, are they affiliated with the Lunars? Are they affiliated with the Andromedans? Are they affiliated with their own original levels of the Syrian system before the timeline event? Are they part of the groups that were before the timeline event? Are we here talking about some kind of interception, holographic overlay technology? But again, we know that people that do meditate and do it in a specific manner, they will begin to have some of the same experiences, which Carl Gustav Jung also connected to. He called it the collective subconscious, or the collective unconscious, all depending on whether or not we had connected into it. So there are certain things that all human minds do, similarly as all atoms end up in the quantum fields, similarly as all of the electromagnetic forces are connected to the 4 forces that drives the powers of the nucleus and make it unfold the different forces and possibilities that it has in different fields of interactive frequency spectra that then leads to the manifestation of our reality field. So with that little thought process there, asking questions, not giving answers, but give rise to contemplation, I would say that this will be the work of the 24th of June 2023, and I will post this on YouTube. I have both posted videos with imagery today, as well as just pure podcasts, as well as this little recording here, finalizing the day as the sun is setting, and then await what tomorrow will bring and see where this amount of energy and seeding and rooting, creating cores, what the effect will be of this seeding. Thank you.